Okay. Okay, welcome everybody. It's good to see you here. Welcome folks from the Journalism School, folks from the Human Rights Center, and welcome to those of you who are on Zoom. I believe we have about a dozen people watching remotely. It's a real pleasure to introduce Mara Kardas-Nelson, former student at the J School, graduated in 2020, right? She has published as a journalist in many, many places, New York Times, NPR, The Guardian, The Nation, and elsewhere. And she is the author of this very good new book, We Are Not, We Are Not Able to Live in the Sky, which we're going to be talking about today. Let me begin, Mara, by asking you, you've written about a huge variety of subjects. And before coming here to the J School, I know you lived and worked in South Africa and in Sierra Leone. Tell us a little about that and about how that led you to journalism.
So thanks to everyone for being here, and the HRC and the J School for helping with this and supporting the book over many years. And Adam was a huge supporter of the book, so I'm very grateful to him as well. So yeah, I worked internationally in South and East and West Africa for about a decade, and did a mix of working in global health and journalism. So kind of bounced back and forth between the two for many years. And that was, I mean, I think that's like, I'm happy to speak to any of the students in here about that. I think that's a path that increasingly journalists are taking, as there's a smaller and smaller number of us who get hired full-time by newsrooms. We end up doing different things at different times. But it also really influenced my work as a journalist in that it offered different perspectives than a journalist might have. It offered much deeper background in global health work and global development, which kind of influenced some of the stories that I ended up doing. And certainly the book is about microfinance, so about an anti-poverty intervention that was very popular from the 1970s until very recently. And I stumbled upon that topic in part because of my work in global health. So by speaking to colleagues who had experiences with helping women who had been enmeshed in debt. And so the background of being kind of, I suppose, having one foot in both fields, both in kind of understanding the daily workings of international health and international development, and also reporting on it, was sometimes a tricky balance. I mean, at times editors would say, "Oh, you're too ensconced on one side." On the other side, when I was working in global health, I kind of the critical edge that journalists have, I had a hard time shaking off when I was working in the industry itself. So it was sometimes a tricky balance, but I do think offered a different perspective. And also just living internationally and then still, being rooted in the US as an American and with family in America also offered this kind of balanced kind of one foot in each place, which I think the book is, takes place half in America and half in Sierra Leone.
It struck me that it was a book that could not have been written by a normal foreign correspondent. I mean, I think of Tom Friedman jetting into one continent one day and another continent the next day and talking to presidents and prime ministers and so forth, and people like him. But a lot of what you dug into really depended upon your living in Sierra Leone for several years, getting to know people, and getting to know people who are usually not the type of person that a foreign correspondent would interview. Tell us something about that.
Yeah, so there are two groups of microfinance borrowers who are profiled in the book, and they're based in Sierra Leone, West Africa. So one group of borrowers is based in Freetown, which is the capital, and the other in Kono, which is the eastern part of the country that's often associated with diamond mining. So if you've heard of the Civil War in Sierra Leone, or if you've seen Blood Diamond, which is about the Civil War, that takes place in part in Kono, in the eastern part of the country. And I followed them from 2019 to 2023 and basically just wanted to understand how these high-priced short-term loans worked or didn't work in their lives, like what the impacts were, not just in a short period of time, so not just a snippet of what are you doing today, but what are you doing over a period of several years as they took out layers of debt. And certainly having the background of having lived there before I was reporting there was extremely helpful, both in terms of knowing the context of Sierra Leone, and also just feeling comfortable there, right? I mean, I felt comfortable using public transport. I felt comfortable going to neighborhoods that maybe I wouldn't have known about had I just been going in for a shorter period of time. And that was, yeah, it was really essential in terms of finding these women. I hope also gaining their trust, acknowledging that I had been there for a long time and kind of also having shared experiences that they had as well. We both had, lived in the country at the end of Ebola, so could share experiences with that as well. But I think having a longitudinal period of time, not just these snapshots that sometimes journalists have, was what I really wanted to look into. And if you look at reporting on microfinance, it's often just done in these kind of snapshot ways. So, 2 weeks at the most with a group of borrowers. And those stories are often really, really bad. So about the very, very bad things that microfinance can do for a person, or really, really good about, a person being lifted out of poverty or having a successful business. And what I found is the reality is much more in the middle if you look over a longer period of time. There are kind of moments of women feeling excited about what the loans can do, and many moments of them feeling really disappointed about high-priced debt. And so having that longer period of time allowed me to kind of, witness that in a different way than a shorter reporting project would allow.
You begin the book, or within the first few pages, with a remarkable and sort of horrifying anecdote where a woman whom you call Musu, these are sometimes pseudonyms, right, is telling you about a friend of hers, Yabam, who has gotten deeply in debt with these microfinance loans, has been arrested, calls Musu from the police station, and Musu says, "She just called to ask me to take care of the kids. That's it. All I know is that the 2 kids are here with me. I've never seen her again." Did you ever find out what happened to the woman?
So, no, I don't. I don't know what happened to the woman I call Yabum. So the kids are still with Musu now, many years later. So that initial interview happened in 2019, and she's still taking care of those kids. And what I tried to do to figure out where she went was, so I knew that she had been taken to the local police station. This is in the eastern part of Sierra Leone. And so I went to the police station, and all police records are destroyed after 3 years in Sierra Leone. All records are paper-based. There's no electronic database. And those, as you can imagine, lots of paper records over many periods, many years, there's too many for police stations to hold on to, so they get rid of them. So I wasn't able to have a paper trail of her, but I interviewed police officers to ask if they remembered her, and they said, yes, we remember her. We don't really know what happened. And it was a lot of kind of trying to follow her contacts to figure out what happened to her. And I still, the kind of story was either she went to the main prison in Freetown, or she fled the community. And it's unclear to Musu and to the other women that where she is.
So this was somebody either forced into long-term imprisonment or to go underground because of debts incurred under microfinance program. And how common is this in Sierra Leone and in other countries?
So in Sierra Leone and other former British colonies, there's a law that allows for criminalization of debt, including very, very small loans, including microfinance loans. And so this is...
But does that go back to the old debtors' prisons in England that Dickens wrote about?
Right, exactly. So there's a long history of criminalized debt within British Penal Code, and that was translated and kind of laminated onto British colonies under colonialism. So the law that's in place in Sierra Leone today is the 1916 Larceny Act, so is over 100 years old, but still on the books. And as it happens, the UK has actually revised that act, but Sierra Leone hasn't, and many other British colonies haven't as well. As colonialism ended, there was just, all of the laws that had been made under colonialism were obviously still enacted in these countries, right? You can't just completely rewrite a legal code overnight. And so it's a slow kind of churn of working through laws to revise or revoke them. And that law has not yet been revised or revoked. So in terms of the kind of statistically how many people we're talking about, it's very, again, because paper records are destroyed after 3 years, it's very hard to figure that out. There's legal aid groups in Sierra Leone who have estimated that it's hundreds of people a year end up in police stations and in jail when they can't pay off their loans. But again, it's hard to verify that. There has been documentation of people going to prison for microfinance debt elsewhere, so in Uganda, in Nigeria, in Jordan, and there's, as I said, this law was kind of a blanket law across former British colonies. So it's something that debtors, including microfinance debtors, potentially have to contend with. A lot of it has to do with how police use the law. So it's at the police discretion whether or not they decide this person is committing a criminal act when they don't pay back. And that's problematic, right? Because then you have an individual person who decides, yes, this is fraud, or not. So that's one of the reasons the law needs to be completely revised, is so that it's not at the discretion of an individual officer who has a lot more power than a poor woman.
So how did things get to that point when the idea of microloans was greeted with such fervor when it was first conceived, and Muhammad Yunus and his organization, the Grameen Bank, won the Nobel Prize, and everybody from the Clintons on down has been, enthusiasts for this wonderful way to bring development to the third world. Take us through the steps of what happened, that it went from there to people being thrown in prison for debt.
So the story that many people, including Muhammad Yunus, tell is that as microfinance became more and more popular, and as it became clear that microfinance debtors, again, mostly women, were paying back their loans, there was a sense of, we can make money off of this. So private banks and private investors began investing in microfinance as a way not only to kind of show that they wanted to do good in the world, but also to make money off of that. And so with that, and particularly with private equity investments, there was a real focus on massive expansion, so getting more and more loans out. That meant to more people, but also multiple loans to a single person, and also increasing interest rates.
But wait a minute, so didn't it first start with the loans came from pools of foreign aid money where there was no profit involved? Then private equity thought this would be a place to make money.
Exactly. And that became particularly popular for private equity, for private investors in the early aughts. And actually, as here in the US, we were having an implosion of credit, right? There was bad credit that led essentially to a global recession. There was a sense of, we can invest elsewhere, that this is a safe market. Microfinance looks actually really safe and profitable because poor people will always be poor. They'll always need to borrow money, right? And so it was seen as a really safe place to put investments at a time when investments in the US felt much more shaky. And so with that, there was massive expansion and increased interest rates. And so interest rates in some places were 80, 90, 100% annual interest. The highest that I found was 250%.
250% a year.
A year, yeah.
So you borrow $1, you have to pay back $2.50 before the end of the year.
Exactly. And often the loan terms are very short, so sometimes 3 months, sometimes 6 months. So that means you're having to pay back really quickly. So the women I met in Sierra Leone, they get a chunk of money and they have to start paying back a week or 2 weeks later. And so you can see how that short term plus
and you
the
take
high
out
interest.
more loans to help you pay
Exactly.
them back.
You kind of get in this cycle of debt. As I mentioned, that's kind of one answer for how microfinance kind of went wrong, is this focus on expansion and interest rates. I do think it's important, though, to note that Eunice and others from the very beginning, so from the early 1970s, as there was a real focus on microfinance as a potential solution, pitched the idea of above market interest rates and of private finance. And so even though it's kind of a quite nice and simple narrative to think, oh, this was nonprofit and good, and then it became for-profit and bad, I think it's a little more muddled. And part of what Eunice really promised from the beginning was the notion of this is a win-win, right? This works for everyone. It can be a self-sustaining solution. We won't have to rely on government aid forever. Women can pull themselves up by the bootstraps. And that's part of what made it so popular. Every president from Reagan onwards has supported microfinance. So even Donald Trump, who's very critical, of course, of international aid, still supported microfinance. And it's in part because of this notion of it being a
Has
win-win.
he started a Trump loan company or something to take advantage of
Not
this?
yet. No, but OPIC, the private investing arm of the U.S. government, focused on microfinance under Trump, as it did under Obama. And so there's this real, there's very few things that are so bipartisan in U.S. politics, particularly now, and support for microfinance has been. And so I say that just to say, I think, often particularly as journalists, we like this arc of kind of something was good and now it's bad, or there was kind of it's easy to make villains at times, and I think it's important to note that sort of sense of it being sustainable and of not needing outside government support was there from the beginning as a way to kind of court this idea of it being a solution everyone could get on board with.
Is there any country anywhere that has sensibly regulated this stuff?
Yes and no. So Cambodia is often the example that's given. So Cambodia is the country that has the most microfinance loans at this point. It's completely saturated with microfinance. People are taking out thousands and thousands of dollars a year in microfinance loans, and those are collateralized with land titles. And so there's a huge issue there in terms of people's land being taken in order to pay back microfinance. That's actually where the title of the book comes. So there's a sense of this being a real crisis in Cambodia. The Cambodian government has tried to regulate microfinance in as much as they've capped interest rates at 18%, but that's on paper. In practice, there's a lot of fees and fines that can rack up that make them on average about 30%. So not 100%, not 250%, but still quite high, particularly for people who are on the margins of poverty and, again, who are risking their land if they can't pay this back. So Cambodia is offered by some as kind of the worst case example because it's so saturated, and others as a sense of, well, at least the government is trying to regulate there.
All this makes me think Shakespeare was right. Isn't it Polonius who says, neither a borrower nor a lender be? Maybe the whole world would be better off. Also, later on in the book, you talk about sort of a movement of giving directly to poor people. Tell us about that. And did this sort of arise in reaction to microfinance?
Yeah, so the notion of unconditional cash grants, or here we sometimes refer to it as universal basic income. It's the same idea, which is the notion of giving poor people, so people under a certain level of income, depending on the country would be different, obviously, a chunk of cash, and just saying that cash is yours, you do with it what you need to. And so that's why it's called an unconditional cash grant or cash transfer. So, if you decide that you need that money for healthcare, you use that. If you need it to buy a cow, it's up to you. It's your discretion. And that's something that has picked up a lot of steam, in part, yes, because of concerns around microfinance and around the high interest rates and people getting in these layers of debt. It's also, talked about here as just an anti-poverty strategy more broadly. It kind of, comes from a sense of a welfare state. And so there's a lot of support, whether, Bernie Sanders has supported it. Libertarians are also often very supportive of universal basic income because of this notion that if someone has a lot of money, then they can just take care of themselves. There's less of a need for the state which was true also for microfinance advocates, this notion of give a person a loan and then they'll be able to kind of flourish and take care of themselves. So I think there's kind of, it's a moment, I think, of potential reflection there before everyone gets really, really excited about UBI or unconditional cash transfers. But what I will say is, I think it makes a lot more sense, right? If you think about the basic premise, which is a poor person is poor because they don't have money. That's the definition of being poor, right? And so you give them money, and you don't expect that money to come back. You don't tell them how to spend their money. You assume they know what they need in their lives. And I think it just is a lot. It's just more logical than the sense that someone can pay back 30% interest and somehow pull themselves out of poverty. And the studies that have been done on universal basic income, even here in California, Stockton had a really big a trial of UBI here, and Kenya has had also a similar program. They've been quite positive in terms of helping people get by a little bit better. But the kind of, if the structural constraints of poverty or conditions of poverty are not also addressed, it's kind of, the argument is, you're putting money to kind of plug in holes. So if you're giving someone more money to be able to pay for higher and higher cost of living, that doesn't address the cost of living itself, right? And so needing to kind of address both things at the same time, the structural conditions in addition to kind of the daily need for cash.
Okay. We can come back in the question period to more questions about microfinance, but just because so many of us here are writers of one sort or another, I would love you to just take us through the process of writing and researching the book. When did the subject come into focus? What did you do next? So on.
So the subject came into focus when initially I was living in Sierra Leone right after Ebola. So Sierra Leone was a country that was heavily impacted by the Ebola epidemic in 2014 to 2016. And one of my colleagues mentioned that she had worked for a legal aid organization and that they were helping women who were in jail for debt, including microfinance debt. And that conversation happened in 2015, and I just always thought, like, what's up with that, basically? How is someone in jail for very small loans, $30, $60 loans, but also, like, what happened to microfinance? I had forgotten about it, I hadn't heard about it, and suddenly I was hearing about it again in the context of Sierra Leone. So that was the initial kernel. And then when I came to the J School, I was supported by the Human Rights Center to go back to Sierra Leone and look into this question of criminalized poverty. So looking at criminalized poverty broadly, that includes loitering laws and other things like that, but also focusing specifically on criminalized debt. And when I was there, that question remained really interesting. How is someone ending up in jail for debt? But what became even more interesting was just looking at how an economy is saturated with microfinance loans. Like, what does that look like, whether a person ends up in jail or whether a person has a successful business? What does microfinance look like today in one of the poorest countries in the world? And so that's kind of where the kernel came from. And then I continued to focus on that at the J School, including in your class. And
although in my class you were thinking about another book. Maybe you still owe me a different book.
Yeah,
So.
I'll take your class again.
Yeah.
But it was this, I mean, I'm sure all of you who are journalists here, you get this kind of question in your mind, and it's kind of like an itch you can't really scratch. That's what it felt like, was just this sense of like,
That's a great definition of the start of a major project.
Right. Yeah. Something you can't quite put away. So then I spent several years going back and forth between Sierra Leone and here. And as I said, the book takes place half in the US. So I wanted to understand people who were advocates of microfinance, so people who really thought this was a solution to microfinance. One of them happened to actually be a Berkeley student in the 60s, and was kind of radicalized at Berkeley and was excited about the notion that we all could be better global citizens, and found microfinance to be the solution. So I spent a lot of time with people who are now in their 70s and 80s to kind of learn about like what their story was. And then at the same time was also going back to Sierra Leone to follow these two groups of women. And I wanted those two narratives together because I think it's in part because of my own experience working in global health and development and kind of wanting to reflect on the impact or lack thereof, or the after effects that perhaps I'm not even aware of some of the work that I've done, and put those alongside the stories of the people who are dealing with programs decades after they're advocated for here in the U.S. So it was about 3 years of that reporting, of going back and forth between the two. This was during COVID, so it was a lot of Zoom. I mean, it was that wasn't great, but it was also kind of awesome because then you get to, I didn't have to travel all around the country. There were Zoom interviews, but Sierra Leone in person. And then it was about 2 years of writing, so about 5 years overall.
What was the time that you did spend researching it in person in Sierra Leone like?
So that was amazing. I mean, I basically, after I found these two groups of women, which it took about 3 months to find these two groups of women.
And you were looking specifically for a cluster of women who knew each other and who'd taken out these loans at the same time.
Exactly. So microfinance borrowers are put into groups, and the idea there is that they'll support each other, but also kind of police each other as well. So they're often called solidarity groups, and it's the sense that they all pay back. They take individual loans, but all pay back together. And so if one woman is a delinquent borrower, doesn't pay back her loan, all the other women are on the hook. And so the idea is this is good for the microfinance company. It acts as collateral, essentially, social collateral. And the idea was also that it would be empowering to these women to work together. What I found is it often results in pretty fractured relationships, as you can imagine. If there's a poor woman in a group and she's struggling to pay back the loan, she gets a lot of pressure from the other women in the group and from their family members as well. So yeah, I wanted to find two groups of women who were doing that. And I wanted to find women who were not the poorest of the poor and not super wealthy either, just kind of like normal people, right? And just kind of see how the loans worked in their lives. And so after I found them, which basically took a lot of just like hanging out in markets and asking people if they would let me hang out with them more and learning about their stories.
So you just go to the market and ask women who are selling stuff, are you
Yeah,
in a
do you take out
microfinance group?
microfinance? Do you know anyone who does? And just kind of tried to get a sense of who I might be able to work
Now,
with.
do you speak the local language there?
Yeah, so I speak Creole, which is a mix of English and African languages, and that was super helpful. Certainly, very helpful in terms of being able to speak with market women and other women. And then I basically just parked myself in the corner of their home and kind of watched what happened. So I'd be like in the corner of someone's kitchen or their living room, or I went to the market with them as they were buying and selling goods, and tried to just kind of embed myself as much as I could in their lives for the time I was there. And when loan officers would come, I would hide in the house so they couldn't see me, but so I could still hear them. So, after a while, it was a lot of hanging out. I mean, that was basically what it was, but that allowed me to kind of get a little more of a sense of the texture of their lives and the way that their loans worked amongst many other things happening in their lives.
Then back here, you went around interviewing experts, government officials, and
Exactly.
so forth.
Yeah. And as I said, I focused a lot on kind of the early microfinance advocates. People who in the 70s and 80s really thought this was a solution to poverty. And I wanted to understand, what was it about this that was so exciting, and also understand them a little bit more, the context they lived and worked in, what they were reading at the time, what the politics were like at the time, again, not to villainize them, but just to understand why they felt like this was such an important solution.
Did you run into hostility because you were pushing back against this consensus that this is a wonderful new idea?
Yeah, in some cases, yes. I mean, I think at the point that I started writing this book in 2019, 2020, and at that point, there were a lot of concerns about microfinance. So there had been stories in 2008, 2009, 2010 about suicides that were related to microfinance. This was in the BBC, The Guardian, Associated Press. So I certainly wasn't the first person to be asking these questions. So people who didn't want to talk about that would either just not respond to my email or say, this has already been written. I don't want to talk further. a lot of people, even people who were still microfinance advocates, were actually really happy to talk, and they were happy to talk because I was clear that I wanted to talk about the history of microfinance. So not just an expose, right, but also really understanding how this came to be over a 50, 60-year period. And people were really happy to talk about that. I think also, catching people when they're retired after they've had a career, they have more time, they're in kind of a reflective mode anyway. So I was surprised by how willing people were to speak about this, even though it was clear that it was a critical history of microfinance.
Do you want to say a word about the writing process?
Yeah, so as I said, it took about 2 years to write in total. And I remember you saying, oh, you should start writing early, like when you're still reporting. And I found that really hard to do, in part because it felt like I was chewing on it for so long, trying to really digest the information, figure out what the narrative would be, how these interweaving narratives would work. And so I did that at times, and it felt like it wasn't sticking. Like I needed to digest it all before I could do that. That being said, it led to a really harried writing process, because then I was like, oh my God, I way over researched. What am I going to do with all of this information? And I have a deadline, right? Like you can massage your book deadline a little bit, but not that much, especially for your first book. So yeah, I wouldn't advise doing that. I think your advice of writing earlier certainly makes a lot more sense.
That's advice I always give, just because I find doing the research is so much easier and so much more fun than writing. People sometimes ask me, do I use a research assistant? And the answer is no, I wouldn't give that pleasure away to anybody. I want a writing assistant. So
yeah, the research is researching for a book, and I imagine this might be true for any other longer term project like a documentary, is so fun, because you're like, wow, I can go so deep on, I went deep on things that really I didn't need to, but I found really fascinating. And there was this moment of being able to kind of go into these little pockets of history. And it also works as an act of procrastination, right? You're like, oh, I must know more about this thing before I write.
Oh, tell me about it.
Yeah. But then I basically, then I just sat and wrote for about 1.5 years, 2 years, in this little blue chair in the corner of my living room, at the end of COVID. So it was a lonely process, but a lot to learn from about how I would do it differently again too.
And your family grew during that time too.
Yep. So I had a baby so I became pregnant when the book was finishing, and then had a baby after the book came out. So I had a book baby and then a human baby.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe it's time for questions from you. Is there a roaming microphone? There is. Okay. Andrea has it here. And then Leah, you'll give us any questions from Zoom.
Yeah,
And then remind me, do we end at 1 or 1:15?
we can end up 20 minutes about Q&A.
Pardon?
105. Around 105, 110.
105, 110. Okay. All right.
Back there.
So fire away. And when you ask a question, you want to identify yourself. Are you a J School student or whatever?
My name is Tony. I'm not a J School student. I just wonder, what is the nature of bankruptcy laws in Sierra Leone? It sounds like there are none, or it only applies to wealthy people. And are they afraid to create bankruptcy laws because it might destroy the financing for the lower income people?
Yeah, so in Sierra Leone and in a lot of places that microfinance exists, there are not bankruptcy laws. That's a really good question. And that's one of the major differences between, there's often a comparison to high price debt here, so payday loans or even credit cards, right? The difference is that you can't go to bankruptcy court in Sierra Leone. There isn't a way to kind of cleanse yourself of debt. Or of your history of bad credit. And what's happening is that so as there's a recognition that people are getting in kind of spirals of debt, taking out multiple loans, What's happening in many countries as kind of a step to try to address that is that there's a credit reference bureau. So let's say I take out a loan from microfinance company A, they report that to the credit reference bureau. And then if I go to microfinance company B, they can say, oh, actually, Mara has another loan. That's kind of a step towards a bankruptcy procedure, except you just get that bad credit history. There isn't a way to absolve yourself of it. So it hasn't actually, like the process of having a bankruptcy court doesn't exist in most of these countries. And that's in large part just because it's a huge bureaucratic burden, right? And these are countries that are pretty poor, that already have a lot going on, and it's just not the highest priority. So I don't think it's, as a way to kind of protect the financial interests of the microfinance industry, although potentially that's there too. I think it's more just, this is such a huge problem that if we suddenly have to also have a bankruptcy court, like we're just not able to do it as a country like Sierra Leone, which is, as I said, poor and already kind of dealing with a lot. I think there's also, when I interviewed the head of basically the person responsible for overseeing microfinance in the Bank of Sierra Leone, which is one person who's responsible for the entire industry in the country of 8 million people. And I said, why aren't you regulating this more? And specifically, why aren't you putting interest rate caps on? And he said, the IMF has told us that we can't do that we need to have unregulated finance in this country, and that we need to do that in order to grow. And I asked him several times just to make sure I was understanding. And he was very clear that from his understanding, the IMF was very clear that they needed an unregulated financial market, including microfinance. So I think it's a mix of both being overwhelmed and of the sense of needing to have kind of unleashed finance at both kind of a national level and an individual level in order for economies to grow.
Wow.
Yeah, hi, my name is Fawad. I'm a J school student, first year. So, the reason that Muhammad Yunus's Grameen Bank became so successful because it replaced an already existing feudal, unorganized money lenders, right? When you spoke to experts and officials here in the US, were they aware of, and these money lenders were very exploitative. There are a lot of stories of suicide and, everything. And even slavery in some cases. So when you spoke to these officials and experts here in the US, were they aware of these stories? Did they know about these existing stories? And what were their reason to replace one system of exploitation with another system of exploitation? One, and second question is, did this system of unorganized money lending also exist in Sierra Leone, or was it a new thing for the country?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the idea that microfinance replaced money lenders and extremely exploitative money lenders was really, as you say, key to early stories around microfinance, and Yunus and others pitched this as an alternative. And in a place like Bangladesh, where I understand there is this history of exploitation, that makes a lot of sense. In a place like Sierra Leone, those money lenders don't exist. So there isn't a local money lending system in the same way there is in other countries. And part of the problem is that model that was created elsewhere was then just kind of plopped on Sierra Leone. And there was this notion that poor people everywhere are the same, right? So a poor person in Bangladesh must be dealing with the same thing that a poor person in Sierra Leone is, when in fact there's a total different local economy, of course, right? It's a different country with a different history. And so in Sierra Leone, there's a lot of local lending groups. So women or poor people in general kind of lend and save together and with each other. But there isn't a kind of money lender in the way that we think of, like a man with bags of money going around to people's homes, extorting them. And so it disrupted the economy in a totally different way, and disrupted those local lending systems. And I think that's a big part of the problem is this kind of sense of, oh, if it works one place, it must work somewhere else. The sense of everything needing to be at scale, which is something we hear about in both the nonprofit world and the business world, right? It must be big in order to be successful. But to your question about whether people here knew about those stories of money lenders in Bangladesh were really essential to early success of microfinance. So, the sense of we here in America can do something to help someone in Bangladesh be freed from that sort of enslavement, the financial enslavement and sometimes physical enslavement, was really essential to early microfinance success. I think, part of the argument for high interest rates early, even when Muhammad Yunus was pitching this in the 70s and 80s, was yes, they're high, they're higher than commercial rates, but they're not as high as money lenders, right? And so that there was a sense of, oh, well, this maybe isn't the perfect solution, or we're a little bit concerned about these interest rates, but at least it's better than the worst alternative. But I think that kind of paved a slippery slope for, well, if you're charging 20%, then you can charge 30 and 40 and 50, right? And I don't think there was really a sense or a consensus of that being a potential consequence. In the early days of this, there was really this like very tangible excitement that I could still hear when I was speaking to people who were advocating for this in the 70s and 80s, of like this was so much better than what was out there, and we're really freeing people from economic slavery. And I think today there's when I speak to those people, there's kind of a sense of, whoops a little bit, but also like we tried, we really did try, and we really felt like this was the best alternative.
Hello. Hi. My name is Christian, and I just started here at the J School. My question is, I know over COVID, rich countries took on a substantial amount of debt, and foreign aid as a percentage of most rich countries' GDP dropped. So I know that there was a transition you had mentioned from for-profit to nonprofit to alleviate the dependence on government aid for microfinance. But how do you think the drop in foreign aid due to the COVID crisis and rising interest rates across the world will affect microfinance in the future? And then my other small question is, I just started as a researcher at HRC, and I'm curious on how HRC supported you in the development of this book.
So that's a really good question about the change in foreign aid during COVID. As I said, I reported this book in Sierra Leone as COVID was happening. And so there were two major things that were obvious just like on a day-to-day basis. One was inflation was and is insane. So it was 50% last year in Sierra Leone. We think of it as high here, and it's out of control in poorer countries. And the other is that Sierra Leone had taken on more and more debt, including from the IMF during this period of time, and the IMF has put on quite significant conditions in order to pay back that debt. So when I was there, the cost of fuel rose twice, and the cost of rice also rose twice, based on the IMF saying subsidies needed to be removed. And so these two things together, these fuel and rice are basically like two core elements of Sierra Leonean economy and food. Rice is eaten by everyone every day. It's really like bread, it's the staple food. Where it was dramatic to see. I mean, on a day I would like drive down, be in a minibus going to one of these groups of women, and you would see people rioting in front of gas stations. People would be complaining about the cost of food, and so it had an immediate and really tangible effect. And these two things together, of subsidies being removed at the same time that inflation is 20, 30, and then 50%, was really dramatic. Microfinance, so this question of foreign aid decreasing, microfinance is doing fine. So if you look at how much is invested in microfinance, and particularly because it is increasingly for-profit investments, it's still tens of billions of dollars. So microfinance is not actually dipping because it's often not aid, right? It's not part of like a foreign aid package. It's a private investment instead. So just as it was during the 2008 financial crisis, it's still seen as a really safe bet for people to invest in part because of the high interest rates and potential profits to be made there. The HRC was amazing. I am so grateful to the HRC. So I did a fellowship there one summer that allowed me to go back to Sierra Leone and do kind of this initial research on criminalized poverty, including debt, and just like hang out with people and try to understand how microfinance worked. And then after I graduated, I was lucky enough to get some more support for them to go back again and continue to work on this. And so the financial support was incredible, but also just the group, the center itself, you know, like meeting other people who are involved in the HRC, having people here today who are involved in HRC who I've been in contact with over the years, has just been totally essential. I mean, part of the experience of writing a book is, at least for me, was loneliness, right? You're like in a corner in a room for a while and hoping that it all works out, and knowing that you have the support of an institution like the J School and like the HRC was really essential on like an emotional level, in addition to just, you know, having a little bit of cash to go back to Sierra Leone.
Hi, Bob Bishop, and I used to be a student here a long time ago. How prevalent are the real high interest rates, the predatory lending, and are the private equity hedge fund crowd, are they still actively involved at those interest rates?
So when I spoke to microfinance experts about Sierra Leone, I would say, oh, the interest rates there are around 30%. And the answer would inevitably be, oh, that's really low, right? So 30% is still considered quite low, even though from an American perspective, that's pretty high. There isn't like an average percentage globally, but and unfortunately, until about 5 years ago, there were several transparency projects that would track microfinance interest rates, so that you could go online to a website called mftransparency.org and look up the real effective interest rate. Those projects have closed because of lack of donor funding and because the industry wasn't interested in financing it for fairly obvious reasons. So it's pretty hard to get transparent interest rates now, information on transparent information interest rates, in part because the interest itself, you know, it'll say, oh, this is a 20% loan, but then there's a lot of, as I mentioned, fees and fines that rack up pretty quickly. So it's actually hard to know. What I will say, and I've said this, if people are supporting microfinance or are interested in learning more about interest rates, let's say of a certain company or a certain country, contacting those companies themselves and asking like, what's your real effective annual interest rate is helpful, and like, especially if you're a funder of microfinance, let's say through Kiva or another kind of platform, I think it would be part of your due diligence to do that. And I have found that companies are pretty willing to respond. And you can also spend a lot of time digging through annual reports, which is not the most fun thing to do, but you can figure out the interest rate that way. But yeah, the short answer is that 30% is still considered on the very low end of that.
Hey there. Thank you both for coming in today and giving this talk. This has been awesome to listen to this conversation. My name's Emily, and I'm with the Graduate School of Journalism. My question is regarding the other organizations or companies or schemes that you found to be caught up in the whole system or the whole relationship between the entities giving the loan and the people receiving the loan. This is based off of reading Carolyn Schuster's, I think 2020 work forecasts on microfinance and insurance companies and schemes in Paraguay. I'm wondering if you found that there were any insurance companies in on this whole process and just what that looked like more robustly beyond the relationship of the two.
Yeah, it's a good question. So, microinsurance is kind of one of the newer iterations of microfinance. So as microfinance has become increasingly criticized and there's been concerns about high price debt, microfinance has been repackaged in something called financial inclusion, which is a much broader umbrella, when the idea that, you know, the basic idea is financial tools for poor people can help lift themselves out of poverty, but it's not just credit, it's also, you know, bank accounts or insurance. And so microinsurance is part of that. I didn't actually look into that very much because it's like its its own industry. What I will say is that insurance is often now compulsory with a microfinance loan. So in Sierra Leone, the women who took out a loan were also required to take out an insurance policy for that loan. And in case someone in their group died, they had to take out like basically a death loan. And so this was, as I said, compulsory, so there wasn't an option. If they wanted to take out a loan, they had to do this. But it was, again, pitched as a win-win, right? So it like protects the microfinance company and it protects the borrowers themselves. And what it effectively did is pushed up the cost of the loan. That was part of why the real interest rate was higher, because they had to pay for this insurance policy up front. And this is something that's increasingly popular, is packaging the two together, or a microfinance company offering insurance alongside a microfinance loan, and then using the person would use the money from that loan to buy the insurance product. And so it's like, quite good for the microfinance company again, because it's taking one product to buy another. In terms of this kind of question of the financial players involved, so it's hard to map because it's quite it's like an octopus, right? Many armed and hard to kind of track how the money flows. What the kind of simple answer is that funding often flows from North America or Europe, and Scandinavia is very involved in microfinance lending, or finance for microfinance lending, and then goes from, let's say, JP Morgan to a smaller regional bank, and that regional bank will have maybe a smaller bank under it, and then will own a microfinance company. So there's often 4 or 5 steps from where the finance originates to where the loan actually takes place. And so that's part of what makes regulation so hard, is like, okay, if you then know that a microfinance company is taking a person to prison, let's say, like, who's responsible for that, right? Is it the loan officer, or is it the finance itself where it's coming from? And so that's part of why it becomes kind of mushy and nebulous and hard to hold anyone to account.
How about we take one more question? You've got the mic here, so go ahead.
Hi, I'm Inara. I'm also a first-year student at UC Berkeley Graduate School of Journalism. Yeah, I mean, growing up in Eastern and Western Africa, I saw a lot of iterations of what microfinance looked like. So my question is really about like what the future of microfinance looks like. And like this summer in Pakistan, I saw one version where like, public-private partnerships are becoming very popular, especially in the banking industry. So Habib Bank, like in Pakistan, has been around for like a really long time. So I'd be like really curious to know what you think the future of microfinance looks like, yeah. And if public-private partnerships would work, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know a lot about the public-private partnerships specifically. That's not something that I found in Sierra Leone, in part because there's a very weak public sector. So I'm not sure specifically about that. In terms of the future of microfinance more broadly, so as I mentioned, there's kind of been a repackaging under financial inclusion, which is kind of an expansion of microfinance, with the idea that that poor people need like an array of financial tools. And I think so even though it's packaged as like a broader strategy, the real linchpin of financial inclusion still is debt. So they'll say, oh, mobile loans, but that's still a loan, right? And so debt really remains a key part of financial inclusion. And so I think that's something right now, just as microfinance was like hugely popular in the early aughts, financial inclusion is now the thing that everyone's talking about. So Melinda French Gates, when she kind of had her recent kind of re-coming out, was saying, financial inclusion for women, and it's something the World Bank and others are really supportive of. And I think there should be a critical eye there to say, well, what does that actually mean? What products are we talking about? And also who potentially stands to benefit from it. So MasterCard is a major proponent of financial inclusion, but in part because they're pitching credit cards to poor people, right? And so they're financially included, but they're financially included with a high-priced debt product. But I think microfinance, I think it will continue. Like, I think I'm not quite sure what it will look like, but we've we've always had a history of high price debt for poor people, and I don't expect that to change anytime soon, given that there's profit to be made and also that there's demand, right? When I spoke to women in Sierra Leone and said, you all are complaining so much about these loans, like, why do you just wish they would disappear? Their answer was always, well, what are we going to do, right? That's how they've learned to rely, to kind of get by in one of the world's poorest countries. And so I think the demand will continue to be there. As Adam mentioned before, cash transfers are often offered as an alternative. And I think I do expect that to be increasingly popular both here in the US and internationally.
Okay, well, thank you, Mara, and thank all of you for coming. And I'm sure if you've got more questions, Mara will be willing to stick around for a bit and answer them. If you've got books that need to be signed, I'm sure she'd be happy to do that. So thanks again for coming.